You are now listening to the Prescription for Purpose podcast, the go-to destination for women who are tired of feeling burnt out and stuck in the exhausting cycle of doing but not thriving. Each week, we'll provide you with Christ-centered mental wellness prescriptions to help you reclaim your peace, renew your purpose, and live life spiritually well. And if you're a therapist or a coach, the tools and insights that we curate here will help you make a Christ-centered impact on your clients today. Are you ready, sis? Let's get started. Hey, friend, and welcome to another episode of the Prescription for Purpose podcast. I'm excited for today's episode where we're going to be talking about how to handle a course correction from the Lord. This morning, I had the opportunity to lead our prayer call in the society, and before the prayer call, I really wanted to sit with the Lord and just ask God what was the word that his daughters needed to hear. He led me to the book of Proverbs and told me that we were in a season of course correction and that there are a lot of us who are struggling in this season with all of the emotional input, mental input, some of the practical things that can happen when you are course corrected by the Lord. Some of us struggling with the discipline that comes with that course correction. And I really wanted to have an opportunity and a space to help you work through that here on the podcast. And so I had a completely different episode planned, but really felt led by the Lord to share this with you because it is a right now word. So the scripture that the Lord brought me to was in Proverbs 3, verses 11 and 12 in the NLT. And it says, "My child, don't reject the Lord's discipline and don't be upset when he corrects you. For the Lord corrects those he loves, just as a father corrects a child in whom he delights." Now, I, of course, went to the New American Standard Version of the Bible to study this. And I think that it's important to read verse 11 in the New American Standard Version, where it says, "My son, do not reject the discipline of the Lord or loathe his reproof." And we'll come back to why that was such an impactful way to look at this. But I think that first off, it's important to know that if you are in a season of course correction, friend, you are not alone. This entire me going back to school, rebuilding the app, what God has revealed to me over the last several months, and honestly, for the good part of the last 6 months, is that he is course correcting a lot of things in my life. And I'm going to let you know right now, sis has been tired, okay? Truth is, I'm tired. Like whatever Tamala Man had said, that's what I was feeling. I have found myself in seasons where I just was like crying, moments where I was crying. So when this semester restarted, in January, I literally was filling out my planner, trying to picture this for it. Okay. My husband comes home. He hears Jackie Hill Perry's album blaring because I'm trying to hype myself. And I have just confirmed with the Lord that I can't take this little semester break that I want. He revealed to me later as to why I could not. But in the moment, I'm trying to fill out my planner and I have no inherent motivation to do so. He walks into my office, music blaring, tears streaming down my face, and I'm trying to hype myself and fill out my planner, okay? That is what course correction moments can look like, where I know that now God was telling me a couple of years ago where he made room, space, and opportunity for me to go to school. And I didn't for several reasons, not even out of sheer just disobedience, but almost just an uncertainty, trying to make sure it was him and not me. I kind of played with the idea, kind of started the process, and then changed my mind because I did not recognize enough and did not take the time enough to pause and really allow the Lord to reveal to me what he was doing, right? It seemed outlandish for me to go back to school after I just said I needed a break from work, which is what I was taking. And so I want you to know that you are not by yourself, okay? That is the biggest thing. Like if you are finding yourself where I'm like kind of trying to do this, trying to get back on track, the Lord has revealed a lot of these things to me as to the why, and it all makes sense. But then actually trekking up that mountain, girl, it's hard. It's tough. And there is a lot of emotional, mental, and even some spiritual impact that you deal with if you find yourself in a season like this. And so we're going to deep dive into course correction. I'm going to share a little bit about how it's looked in my own life and then prayerfully give you some strategy to help you if you don't want to end up like me, sitting here crying, listening to Jackie Hill Perry, trying to really hype yourself up and do the things. Okay. So I first want us to really have an understanding of what it means to course correct. And this term course correct back in, when at its origin was really utilized for first people who were navigating the seas and then for people who are like pilots. And it really is about having the essential tools or the ability to pivot in order for you to reach the destination, right? So they have all of these tools, all of these compasses, all of these plans mapped out. But a lot of people would find themselves needing to adjust their routes based on things like wind, obstacles, things of that nature to ensure that the journey was safe and efficient. And course correction for us is the same thing. However, it does not often feel like that. Right. So originally, this term course correct really meant that we need to return back to a planned route or to account for errors or external conditions. And for us spiritually, it really involves us making adjustments to our paths, making sure that we're staying on the pathway that God has given us. So if God is telling you to go north, friend, and you go northeast, you're still off course. And eventually there will be a separation that will happen. And that's where a lot of us have found ourselves. When you look at what Solomon is telling us in Proverbs 3:11 and 12, he's telling us not to despise the Lord's discipline or grow weary of his reproof. And when you look at this term discipline, it's important to understand that it means that we should not reject, in the New American Standard Version, his discipline. Rejection meaning that we treat it as trash, we refuse it, we count it as worthless, and some of us even get offended by it. We get offended at the Lord trying to correct us. So we don't want to reject his discipline. Discipline meaning that it is his correction, and it doesn't always mean punishment. Discipline and punishment are not the same thing. And we have become conditioned to believe those things to be equivalent, and they're not. Now, is there times when God will have punishment be part of discipline? Yes. And we just got to take it and deal with it and grow through it, right? So there are things that may feel like punishment, but they actually aren't. And then there are times where God will allow punishment to come if it's going to get you back on course. One of the greatest examples of this is Jonah. Like Jonah was like, I'm off the course. I'm refusing the discipline. And then he ended up in a whale's belly. Like he utilized that punishment, the 3 days, to get him back on course. But all discipline is not punishment. So God's discipline will educate us, train us, and equip us to be successful and to really be on the plan or on the path that he has designed for us. But if we are rejecting it, if we're refusing it, if we are offended by it, then you'll find yourself in this cycle of doing but not thriving. You'll find yourself burnt out. You'll find yourself overwhelmed. You'll find yourself doing everything but feeling like the work that you're putting in is not indicative, like the outcomes, the math ain't mathing. And then we're told not to loathe his reproof, meaning that you aren't dreading God coming in and giving you the evidence, telling you why. You want God to change the standard instead of us meeting his standard. And a lot of us get to a point where the word loathe in the Greek, it means making someone tired to death, right? Wanting to desperately get rid of something or to get away from something, that you loathe something to the point of emotional nausea. And a lot of us may not feel like this resonates with us, but it shows in our actions. It shows in us not going to God about every decision we make. It shows in us really allowing our thoughts in ways to be the things that we go to first before we go to the Lord. And so all of us, at some point. You may not be like me, but at some point you will find yourself in a position where you may need to course correct. And what I want you to understand is that the course correction is not about you not making mistakes. It's not about you having to be perfect. It's not even about correcting the errors. It is really about you fundamentally enhancing our relationship or your relationship with God. It's about God refining our character. It's about God fulfilling our divine purpose or showing us how to fulfill the divine purpose that He has for our life. And so a lot of times you'll take it as a moral judgment against you. But no, the Lord loves you enough. Look at how you are addressed, right? My child. That's relational. So when God is giving you correction, when He's course correcting you, friend, it is not punitive to where He's wagging your finger. He's saying, no, daughter, come here. Here's what I need you to understand about me. Look at this. Look at this situation, right? God had to pull up on me, Charla. This looks like a mess, but look at this mess. Before you even get to trying to clean it up, Charla, I need you to understand what went wrong here. You were more concerned about people telling you how you always in somebody's school. You let that voice be louder than what I told you. I need you to start trusting what I tell you to do. And me not taking a break this semester was a good case in point of me learning, being tested in that and learning that was okay, that I understood that I could not repeat that pattern. I could not, because my husband's like, girl, just take the break. It's only 3 months. But I could not do that. I said, I can't. And literally within a couple of days, there was all of this information about how the new legislation was doing all this stuff with student loans. Like, child, student loans may not exist come August. I don't know. But God knew. And I heard Him enough. And I understood the lesson and the discipline of me delaying me enrolling in school enough to where I passed the test. And I hope you hear what I'm saying. Like, I did it once. I'm dealing with the discipline. I got tested because what's 3 months, God? Right? It seems small, but it ended up being something that could be completely outside of my control. And learning to trust the Lord, hear what He says to do that first, even if people who are well-meaning may try to give you opposite instruction. And I pray that makes sense. You have to understand that course correction comes from the Lord. And you have to be willing to deal with the emotional turmoil, the response, and the feelings of it all. Why do a lot of us struggle with this? Because a lot of us, when you are dealing with course correction, you're going to feel like you're dealing with confusion and disorientation. So you may feel confused. You may not have clarity. You may feel like you were doing one thing and now you're moved to the other. You may struggle with things like fear and anxiety, right? Fear of the unknown is one of the most powerful ways. That's where the spirit of fear comes in and it paralyzes you from actually moving, from you making the course correction. And so you worry about the risk of the new path. You grieve the loss of what felt secure. Then you have these sleepless nights. You have this persistent worry because you're really trying to figure out whether or not you're making the right choice. And then we have grief that comes with it, right? Grieving dreams, relationships, careers, grieving what you leave behind naturally as God calls you to the next. Think of people like Abraham who had to leave everything, who God told him to go and get ready to sacrifice the son that he had prayed for. But we have to be okay with God course correcting. Some of us resist course correction because we are comfortable. And I keep talking about this whole conversation that I had with the Lord about comfort zones, but like you're not comfortable if you are disobedient to God. Like I should not have any level of comfort in disobedience. And that's really a lot of that restlessness that you feel, friend. If you are in the middle of a course correction, that's what it is. It's not a you thing. It's your spirit saying, hey, alarms. It's that internal alarm system that is saying, hey, we off track, right? How Siri be telling us like, hey, turn around, alternate route. right? Like I need you to really make sure that you are course correcting and going in the right direction. And so it's easy for us to be comfortable in what's familiar, even if what's familiar is no longer fruitful. And we have this resistance because we have a desire to stay in what we know and we want to avoid the discomfort of stepping into a new role, stepping into new environments because it feels less secure. Some of us resist the season of course correction because we are very prideful, right? Admitting that something needs to change or to be course corrected, it really challenges our self-concept. And you might struggle feeling like a failure. You may question your own judgment and decision making. And it really makes it hard for you to accept these necessary changes. Like, how I know this me and it's not God. And if I messed up so bad over here, I don't want to move no more. But all of that is pride, right? We are leaning to the Lord for our guidance. It's His word that lights our path. And so we have to be deliberately dependent on Him. We have to be mindful and be careful that just because God used one modality in one season, used one tool, one resource, one relationship in one season, that He is saying that you can use it for the rest of forever. You have to marry the mission and not the method. Because what will happen is a lot of times you'll find yourself trying to justify, or as my pastor says, you can make yourself hear the Lord. You'll try to justify something that God is telling you to let go of, and it is very dangerous. If you are having to justify in your mind and give talking points as to why you are maintaining something that God has called you to let go of, we have to look at that being an idol. And that all comes down to pride and self-concept. And then the last reason why a lot of us resist course correction is because there is a lack of faith, right? Resistance a lot of times is rooted in a lack of faith, not just believing that, in God. Like believing in God is good, but the Bible says even the demons believe. We have to allow God to not only be our savior. We have to allow him not only to be our father, but we also have to allow him to be Lord, meaning that he can direct us, meaning that he tells us what to do. And so when you hear God and respond appropriately, that is faith. And so a lot of us may hear something, but then we don't respond appropriately. That gives room for doubt to come in. And then it makes us struggle. And now we're double minded. And we know that the Bible tells us that if you're double minded, if you're going back and forth, you can expect nothing. And so we have to be very mindful of if we are resisting course correction. You don't want to find yourself on the other side of East Egypt and God never told you to be there. There's a lot of mental, emotional, and psychological and even practical things here that we have to consider. And I want to really lay that out for you because I think that you will be able to better discern and be prayerful about what you have going on. So if you feel like something is off, right? You can't pinpoint the reason, but you have some restlessness, you're overthinking. It might be time, like you might be in the middle of a course correction. If you're struggling with shame or self-doubt, a lot of times once God reveals the area of need, it may trigger some shame, right? Like I'm not good enough or I failed God. And so then it's like, okay, but if I accept the correction, did I waste my time? Did I disappoint God? Did I disappoint everybody else? A lot of us struggle with having a control complex, right? If I shift my plans, then everything that I've built, everything that I've done is going to come crumbling down. But we have to remember who actually built that, who gave you the resources, and do we want to have to maintain something outside of the will of God? Do we even have the capacity to maintain anything outside of the will of God? That's probably why a lot of us are anxious right this second. And we're just ignoring that internal alarm system. you're emotionally exhausted because you're trying to maintain appearances and you're trying to force old strategies that no longer work. And so now you're burnt out. You're tired of pushing and you know something needs to change, but you're not quite sure what, or God has revealed it, but it seems like too much of a release, too much of a change. And now you're struggling. And so then this shows up in your relationships. It shows up in your job, right? Like I put all these years into being on this career path and God's telling me to move into a different direction. Oh, I've been, friends with this person or in ministry with this person or doing whatever with this person and the version of them that I thought. And now if I change my priorities, if I change my boundaries, what are they going to think? Are they going to think I'm abandoning them? Am I not Christian enough, right? Like what is this going to cost? Not feeling like you have clarity. So you know something has to change, friend, but you're like, I don't even know where to start. Right? And even let's keep it a buck, the financial constraints and the time constraints. Adjusting course is going to require sometimes new training, may require you to move, alter your work schedule, right? And so now there's a financial fear of instability or time mismanagement. Like, God, can I even afford to pivot? Okay. Will I have enough resources or time to do what is asking me to do? That has been a very real struggle of mine. I am continuing obligations like the podcast, continuing to put videos on YouTube, and God has even had me pivot so I can manage appropriately, continuing to show up in the society, continuing to show up at school, at home, at work, and rebuilding an app. And God has had to really manage my time. And I'm sleeping 7 hours a night because I can't play about my body. And God has really allowed, I don't know how, time and financial resources to be available to do what I need to do. Now, do it still feel tight? Every day. But God is really allowing me the space and the grace to do what he's called me to do. So let's keep it a buck. Course correcting does not always look pretty. It don't feel good, but it's necessary. And when you're approaching a season of course correction, you may feel a level of disconnect, right? I used to feel close to God, but now I don't really hear him in my quiet time. I really feel like God is calling me deeper, but I am really struggling in obedience. You may start questioning God's love. Like, God, are you punishing me or are you guiding me? Because now you have these unresolved wounds from past authority figures, things like even church hurt, right? It's not even just our parents, but things like church hurt and other insults to our emotions that we face that can cause difficulty. Or, and this is me all the way, how do I know if this is the way God calling me to go? Because I didn't have to correct once. Now I'm going this way. Like, how do I know this time? Because now you worry about attributing every life disruption to discipline. That can't be it. Like, you will know. Like, I knew with great certainty that that I was out of alignment. And I knew that once I got into it, things would start happening. The minute I started on the proper course, oh, now I'm in kidney failure. Great. That was last year. This year, child, everything going haywire. There are several attacks and tests happening personally, relationally, just everywhere. But I have to stay the course. And a lot of times that resistance is a sign that you are now on the right course and you just have to trust God. The other way that I know that I'm on the right track is because God has continued to make provision for what he has purposed. He's connected me with people, even like my preceptor for school. Like, God has taken care of so many of the details that I was worried about initially, which caused me, on top of worrying about the voices of other people, to shy away from doing what he called me to do. And so we have to really make sure that we are being sensitive enough to know when we're being called to course correct and being discerning enough to know that sometimes it's just the ebbs and flows of life. Okay. Your kid throwing up is not God telling you need to course correct. Maybe you need to course correct their diet. I don't know, but it's not that. It's these heavier, more ongoing times. It's when it's a persistent feeling, a persistent emptiness, not something that is brief, a day or two, but it's like, man, something is off and I can't really put my finger on it. And a lot of times, God will allow for these bigger disruptions, right? Talking about Jonah. Like, oh, you're just about to get swallowed by a whale. There's a storm, there's a whale, because we have to start practicing really learning how to examine ourselves. The Bible tells us in Second Corinthians that we are to examine ourselves. There is a level of humility that takes. In Psalms 139, David says, "Search me, O God, and point out anything that is unlike you, anything that is offensive." And when we approach God this way, when we are proactive in examining ourselves, we can avoid some of these major disruptions, right? When I constantly and consistently am finding myself to where I am not sensitive to the Holy Spirit, I'm ignoring his small, still voice, then that's when God will come in real dramatic, like, okay, now here's a whale. Now, Saul, you about to be Paul, but you're going to go blind first and you're going to get on straight street. Like, I don't want those kind of disruptions. I really don't, right? A lot of us see these wake up calls, even in even though they feel punitive or like punishment, in all honesty, it's still God's protection. God's desire is for ultimate good. And sometimes he'll use these major disruptions to realign our hearts with his purpose. But what I want us to do is to learn how to regularly self examine ourselves in a way that is making sure that we're staying in alignment, that is improving our efficiency, improving our accuracy, not perfection, but like, okay, if I veer off, I don't veer too far off. You hear what I'm saying? I really pray that you do. I need you to make this a part of your regular schedule programming. Our brains are constantly rewired based on the repeated thoughts and habits and the things that you do. It's called neuroplasticity. So if you start regularly sitting down with yourself and with the Lord to really help you think about what you're thinking about, think about what you're doing, look at patterns, then we can rewire and build the life that God is calling us to. We can course correct without having to have big dramatic interruptions into our lives. And we even see this in like healthcare, right? Like doing the regular self-assessment is why you shouldn't ignore, a headache, right? If you have a persistent headache and you decide not to go to the doctor, like, girl, that could be high blood pressure. That could be all of these looming things. And you don't find out because you're ignoring the discomfort. You're ignoring it. And now you didn't have a stroke. Now there's permanent damage. God still kept your life, friend, but now there's permanent damage because we were ignoring the subtle signs. And I pray you hear my heart. Like, we can't allow that to happen. We can't allow that to happen. And so I really want you to think about this pathway or the framework that a lot of people utilize in business for course correction. It's called the plan, do, check, act framework. And it really allows you to map out what you have going on. Okay. So if you are feeling scattered, I need to figure out what it is that I'm going to do. I need to develop a plan. I need to sit with the Lord. I need to ask for his direction. I need him to download the vision to me. Then you need to do the things, friend. That means that even those micro habits, even those small things, like start. If God told you to start writing a book, girl, open up a Google Drive document and start with a title. Start brainstorming, right? You do it. Then come back and reassess. And then make sure that you are course correcting as needed. Now go back out and do it again. This should be something that is cyclical. that we see in our life. So that way we can avoid, hopefully, prayerfully, major disruption, but we're still heeding to God's correction. We're still heeding to his instruction, and we are able to actively participate in our own growth and development with God. One of the best examples of this is Peter's story in John 21. Y'all know that Peter denied Jesus 3 times. Okay. I love Peter. I feel like Peter is like a little crash out, but also called. Okay. He is called and a crash out at the same time. And I love Peter. But we see in the story of Peter how God course corrected him. And he even utilized this, plan, do, check, act type of pathway. So Peter denies Jesus 3 times. He goes back to fishing. When Jesus is resurrected, he finds Peter, like Peter's back fishing, back doing what was comfortable, right? He goes back to not being the catcher of men. But in the course correction, he checks, like Jesus checks him. Do you love me? So the same way that Peter denied Jesus 3 times, Jesus asked Peter 3 times to affirm his love. Do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me? Then feed my sheep. And so then we see Peter get recommissioned to go out and feed his sheep. And then we see Peter step into leadership within the early church. So understand that when God meets us, when we fall short, when there is a need to course correct, it's not to condemn us, but it is for restoration. And when our efforts feel fruitless, it may be time for us to check and see if we're operating in alignment with God. So the fruit isn't always monetary, but the fruit could be lessons learned, connections, relationship. But we have to understand that true restoration comes when we accept correction and we move forward in obedience. Peter was fishing. He went back to his old life. Jesus pops up, gently confronts and restores Peter through this dialogue. And then Peter feels that regret, but also that renewed love, right? And I can attest to that. I'm like, God, I'm so sorry. Like, I delayed this, that. I could see the things, and my brain tried to take me to where I felt like I was just the worst, right? But we have to understand the difference between shame and conviction. The Holy Spirit brings conviction for restoration. Shame wants you to grovel and be on the ground and really be out of commission. But true conviction is about restoration. The Lord is restorative and he is gentle. And then he redefines Peter's role, right? Reconnects with him, gets Peter's recommitment, and then recommissions him to go back out. And Peter then, he acted, right? He went out and did what God called him to do. He grew in the faith and became the leader. And so it's important that when we sit down and we allow the Lord to reveal how he's correcting us, what he's doing in this season, that we address the internal noise, we look at the external noise, but understand that all in all, God is trying to restore you and he loves us. I really pray that you hear what the Lord is saying. I don't know who this is for, but friend, I pray that you apply it, that you then sit down and you look at every situation. Okay, I planned. This is the vision. This is what I did. Did this work? Evaluate and then repeat. Like, okay, I got to go back out and do it again. Some of us do the check and then we get paralyzed because we feel like we didn't make the right decision. And so we stop. I need you to understand the importance in this season of course correction, of what God is doing. And the way that you put this into practice practically is by scheduling weekly or daily check-ins. What went well today? What didn't? Take 15 minutes, once a week, once a day, whatever, and really ask yourself, okay, did I have any convictions today? right? You can use a framework like the plan, do, check, act framework to journal. Plan. Okay, what was I trying to do? What did I do? How did it go? What do I need to change? Ask God to give you perspective. So that means you need to be in your word. That means that you need to be having prayerful meditation, similar to what David said. Like, God, reveal to me the areas of my heart, of my life, relationally, things that I know are not in alignment with you, or I may not know. Bring them to my attention and allow me to deal with them swiftly. Bring in accountability, and then make sure that you celebrate those tiny wins. God told you to write a book? Great. Go create a Google Drive folder. You start it. And once you start, it will be easy to start turning the ship and to really course correct. And so my prayer is that this blessed you, that you hear what God is saying more than what you hear what I'm saying, to know that you're not alone. But we really need to make sure that we are not rejecting the Lord's discipline in this season, and we are allowing him to course correct us. So friend, I love you. God bless you. And I'll talk to you again next week.